If someone had told me a year ago that my life would be completely undone and remade by a stranger on a train, I would have given them the same quiet, dismissive smile I reserve for patrons who insisted a book on ancient aliens belonged in the history section. My life was a carefully curated collection of quiet moments. It was the scent of old paper and binding glue in the archives where I worked. It was the precise alignment of books on my shelves at home, organized by subject, then author, then publication date. It was the solitary cup of tea I drank every morning while watching the sun cast long, lonely shadows across my small, tidy apartment. My routine was a fortress, and I was its willing, solitary king. Then there was the 7:42 a.m. train. It was the one variable I couldn't control, a daily 15-minute intrusion of the loud, messy, unpredictable world into my own. And for the past 6 months, it was where I saw him. He was a disruption made of muscle and denim and quiet intensity. He always sat in the same area, 2 rows ahead and across the aisle, a fixed point in the chaotic churn of commuters. He looked like he was carved from something harder than the rest of the world. Broad shoulders strained the fabric of his worn flannel shirts or thick work jackets. His hands were large, knuckles often scraped, fingers calloused. They were hands that built things, that fixed things, that fought against the stubborn resistance of wood and steel. They were nothing like my hands, which spent their days cradling brittle manuscripts and tapping softly on a keyboard. His face was all sharp angles and shadows, a jaw that looked permanently clenched, a dark stubble that was always there, as if he'd shaved yesterday or the day before, perpetually caught in the space between clean and bearded. He looked tired, not just sleepy, but a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that seemed to settle in the lines around his eyes. He never read a book or scrolled through a phone. He just stared out the window, his reflection a ghostly twin superimposed over the blur of the passing city. I didn't know his name. I didn't know what he did, though I guessed it was construction or something equally physical that required such strength. I didn't know anything about him, but in the echo chamber of my own mind, I had built a whole life for him. A wife, maybe. Kids, probably. A life so completely, utterly different from my own. He was the embodiment of a world I only observed from a distance, a world of loud noises and easy confidence and unquestioned belonging. He was, in my mind, a monolith of traditional masculinity, the kind of man who would never even register my existence, let alone my gaze. My watching was a secret, a silent, one-sided conversation held across the worn vinyl seats and sticky floors of a commuter train. It was a small, painful ritual. I'd get on, find my seat, and my eyes would find him. My heart would perform its stupid little flutter, a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. Then I would spend the journey cataloging the minute changes in his appearance. A new scratch on his cheek, the dark circles under his eyes looking a little deeper today, the way he'd rub the back of his neck, a gesture of pure, unadulterated weariness. It was pathetic, I knew, this obsessive observation of a stranger. It was the emotional equivalent of pressing my face against the glass of a bakery, hungry for a connection I was too afraid to even ask for. The distance between us wasn't just the few feet of dirty train car floor. It was a chasm, a vast, yawning canyon carved out by my own insecurities and assumptions. He was strong. I was slight. He was worldly. I was cloistered. I was certain, impossibly completely straight. And I was not. So I kept my distance. I wrapped my solitude around me like a familiar coat and told myself it was warmth. I told myself I preferred the safety of the imagined narrative to the terrifying risk of a real one. This was my status quo, a life of quiet order, punctuated by a daily, silent ache for a man who didn't know I existed. And I believed with absolute certainty that it would never, ever change. The snow started as a gentle flurry, a picturesque dusting on the city's gray shoulders. By the time I left the archive, it was a blizzard, a thick, churning vortex of white that swallowed sound and erased the hard edges of the world. The city was grinding to a halt. The usual evening rush had become a slow, desperate crawl. But the trains were still running, for now. I boarded the 742, the evening run this time, the car packed with damp, irritable commuters. I didn't see him at first. My heart did a strange dip, a mix of disappointment and relief. Maybe he'd gotten off work early. Maybe he was already home, warm and safe. The thought was both comforting and profoundly lonely. Then the train lurched, a groan of stressed metal, and the crowd shifted. And there he was, standing, holding onto an overhead pole, his usual seat taken. He was closer than ever before, close enough that I could see the individual snowflakes melting in his dark hair, close enough that I could smell the cold air clinging to his coat, a faint, clean scent of sawdust and winter. My breath caught in my throat. I buried my face in my book, a prop, a shield. Don't look. Don't stare. Don't be a creep. The train moved in fits and starts, crawling through the storm. We made it 2 stops before it happened. A long, final screech of brakes that threw everyone forward. Then silence. The lights flickered once, twice, and died, plunging the car into a dim, emergency-lit twilight. A collective groan went through the passengers. The conductor's voice crackled over the intercom, a tinny, distorted sound. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We are currently stopped between stations due to a power failure on the line. We are working on the problem. Please remain calm. An hour passed. The mood in the car curdled from irritation to genuine anxiety. The emergency lights cast long, strange shadows. The heat died, and a deep, penetrating cold began to seep in through the windows. People started to get off at an emergency access point, led by transit workers through the swirling snow to a nearby road. But my stop was miles away. I had nowhere to go, so I stayed. And he stayed. The car slowly emptied, until it was just a handful of us scattered among the seats. The world outside the windows was nothing but a white wall. We were suspended in time and space, a metal tube full of strangers, adrift in a sea of snow. The cold was becoming a real problem now. I could see my breath, a small, fleeting cloud in the dim light. I pulled my coat tighter, my thin librarian's coat that was no match for this kind of weather. I was shivering, my teeth chattering. And then I saw him move. He walked down the aisle, his heavy work boots making soft, solid sounds on the floor. He stopped by my seat. My heart hammered against my ribs, a desperate, panicked drumbeat. This is it. He's going to say something. He's going to tell me to stop staring. He knows. He just gestured to the empty seat beside me. Is this taken? He asked. His voice. I never heard it before. It was deeper than I'd imagined. A low rumble, slightly rough around the edges like gravel. I shook my head, unable to form words. He sat down. The space between us, once a chasm, was now just a few inches of cold vinyl. His presence was overwhelming. A solid wall of heat and quiet energy. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, a stark contrast to the biting cold of the car. I stared straight ahead, my hands clenched in a fist in my pockets. My entire consciousness was focused on the few inches of air separating his thigh from mine. Don't think about it. Don't think about it. Read your book. Oh God, you can't read your book. It's too dark. Cold, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a simple statement of fact. Yes, I managed to croak out. My voice sounded thin and reedy, a pale imitation of his. We sat in silence for a long time after that. The silence was different now. It wasn't the comfortable, anonymous silence of strangers sharing a commute. It was a thick, charged thing full of unspoken thoughts. I risked a glance at him. In the dim light, he looked different, less imposing, more human. I could see the faint silver of a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, a detail I'd never noticed from a distance. I could see the raw, chapped skin of his knuckles, the dirt ingrained in the creases. These weren't the hands of a mythical giant. They were the hands of a man who worked hard, a man who was probably in pain. His confidence, which I had always perceived as a kind of arrogance, seemed to have evaporated in the cold. He just looked tired and cold. He was shivering, too, a slight tremor running through his powerful frame. And in that moment, the carefully constructed narrative I had built around him shattered. He wasn't a monolith. He was just a man, a cold, tired man, stuck on a train just like me. My fear, which had been a roaring fire in my chest, subsided to a low, manageable flicker. In its place, something else bloomed. An instinct. A simple, human urge to offer comfort. I had a thermos in my bag. It was a habit, a small piece of my rigid routine. Hot tea, brewed exactly the way I liked it. My hands were shaking as I unzipped my bag and pulled it out. The metal was cold to the touch, but I knew the contents were still scalding. "I have some tea," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "If you want some." He turned his head to look at me fully for the first time. His eyes were dark, a deep, unreadable brown. And in them, I saw not arrogance, not judgment, but a flicker of surprise. And something else. Something that looked like gratitude. "Yeah," he said. That would be great. Thanks." I unscrewed the lid, which doubled as a small cup. My hands were trembling so badly I was afraid I would spill it. I poured the steaming, fragrant liquid into the cup, the small cloud of vapor a welcome sign of warmth. I held it out to him, and as he reached to take it, our fingers brushed. It was nothing, a fleeting, accidental contact, but it felt like a lightning strike. A jolt of pure, undiluted electricity shot up my arm, straight to my chest, where it set that frantic bird to fluttering again, harder this time, a wild, desperate panic. My skin burned where he had touched it. He felt that. He must have. It was so obvious. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. I expected him to recoil, to pull away, to give me a look of disgust. But he didn't. He just took the cup, his large, calloused fingers wrapping around the small plastic shape. "Thanks," he said again, his voice softer this time. He took a sip, his eyes closing for a moment as the warmth hit him. He looked vulnerable, and in his vulnerability, I found a strange, unfamiliar surge of courage. The power dynamic, which had always been so skewed in my mind, had suddenly, inexplicably leveled. He was no longer the imposing stranger, and I was no longer the invisible observer. We were just two people, sharing a cup of tea in the dark. He finished the tea and handed the cup back to me. Our fingers didn't touch this time. I was both relieved and disappointed. He leaned his head back against the cold window, a long sigh escaping his lips. The small gesture seemed to drain the last of his energy. His breathing became shallow, quick. His hands, resting on his knees, clenched and unclenched. "You okay?" I asked, the words coming out before I had time to second-guess them. He didn't answer for a moment. He just kept staring out at the white abyss. Not a fan of small spaces, he finally said, his voice tight. When they stopped moving, it was a confession, a crack in a stoic facade. The monolith was admitting to a weakness. My archivist brain, the part of me that cataloged and cross-referenced and understood systems, kicked in. I knew about panic attacks. I'd had my fair share, huddled in my own apartment when the world felt too loud, too demanding. I knew the feeling of the walls closing in, of your own breath becoming an enemy. "Look at me," I said. The words were quiet, but they held a strange authority. He turned his head slowly, his dark eyes wide, a hint of panic swimming in their depths. "Breathe with me," I instructed. "In for 4, hold for 4, out for 6. I started counting, my voice low and steady. He followed my lead, his broad chest rising and falling in time with my count. It was the strangest, most intimate thing I had ever done. Me, the quiet observer, guiding this powerful man back from the edge of his own anxiety. We sat like that for minutes, our shared breath the only sound in the frozen train car. Slowly, the tension in his shoulders eased. The frantic clenching of his fists stopped. The panic in his eyes receded, replaced by that same weary exhaustion as before. "Better?" I asked. He nodded, a small, jerky movement. "Yeah," he breathed. "Thanks. How did you—" "I get them too, sometimes," I admitted, the confession costing me a piece of my carefully guarded privacy. He looked at me then, really looked at me. And the distance, that vast, impossible chasm, collapsed into nothing. "My name's Julian," he said. "Leo," I replied. The train car had become a world unto itself, a bubble of dim light and shared warmth, insulated from the rest of reality by the storm raging outside. The few other remaining passengers were asleep, huddled under coats in distant seats. We were, for all intents and purposes, alone. And we started to talk. It started with small things. Our jobs. I told him I was an archivist at the city library, a preserver of forgotten stories. He told me he ran a small contracting business, just him and one other guy. He built things. I protected things. The symmetry was not lost on me. He talked about the stress of it, the constant worry about finding the next job, about making payroll, about the physical toll it took on his body. People see the calluses, he said, looking down at his hands, and they think you're tough. They don't see that it's just a map of all the things that have hurt you. The statement was so poetic, so unexpected, that it left me speechless. This was not the man I had invented in my head. The gruff, simple, confident man. This man was thoughtful and wounded and articulate in his exhaustion. Then he turned the conversation. "I've seen you," he said, his voice quiet. "On the train. In the mornings." My blood ran cold. My stomach filled with a swarm of frantic bees. He knew. He knew I was watching him. "You're always reading," he continued, a faint ghost of a smile on his lips. I was always jealous. Wish I had the time to just sit and read. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation, a confession of his own. I've seen you too," I stammered, my face burning. "I figured," he said, and the smile became a little more real. "You're not very subtle." I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I didn't mean to stare. "Don't be," he said, his voice dropping even lower, becoming a soft rumble that vibrated through the seat. It was nice, knowing someone was looking. I've been feeling pretty invisible lately. And there it was. The truth. The core of it all. We were both lonely. Two solitary planets, spinning in our own orbits, who had finally, against all odds, drifted into the same gravitational pull. He told me about the bad breakup. A woman he'd been with for years, a relationship that had hollowed him out, left him feeling like a stranger in his own life. She said I was boring, he admitted, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. Predictable. A monolith. The word echoed the one from my own internal narrative, and a wave of shame washed over me. I had judged him in the exact same way. "You're not," I said, the words fierce and sudden. "You're not a monolith." He looked at me, his dark eyes searching my face in the dim light. "How would you know?" he asked, a genuine question. "Because a monolith wouldn't be scared of a stalled train," I said softly. "And a monolith wouldn't have a scar on his eyebrow that makes him look like he lost a fight with a pirate. And a monolith definitely wouldn't say something poetic about calluses." A real smile broke through his exhaustion then. A genuine, heart-stopping smile that crinkled the corners of his tired eyes and transformed his entire face. It was like watching the sun rise after a long night. "A pirate, huh?" he chuckled. "A very handsome pirate," I added, and then immediately wanted to die. The words just fell out. The silence that followed was deafening. It stretched for an eternity. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. "You've done it now. You've ruined it. You've crossed the line." But Julian didn't pull away. He leaned closer. The air between us grew thick, heavy. I could feel the heat of his body, smell the faint scent of tea on his breath. He lifted his hand, the one with the scraped knuckles and the map of old pains. He moved with an agonizing slowness, as if giving me every possible chance to pull back. His thumb brushed against my cheek, a feather-light touch. His skin was rough, calloused, but his touch was unbelievably gentle. My eyes fluttered shut. "This is real. This is happening." "Leo," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. And then his lips were on mine. It wasn't a passionate, desperate kiss like in the movies. It was slow. It was hesitant. It was a question. His lips were chapped and cool from the cold, but they were soft. It was a kiss of profound, staggering honesty. It was the taste of shared loneliness and unexpected comfort. It was the silent acknowledgement of months of stolen glances across a crowded train car. I leaned into him, my hand coming up to rest on his chest. I could feel the steady, solid beat of his heart under my palm. It was the most real thing I had ever felt. When we finally broke apart, We just looked at each other, our breath mingling in the cold air. Nothing needed to be said. Everything had been said in that one quiet, world-altering kiss. He didn't let go of me. His hand moved from my cheek to the back of my neck, his thumb stroking my skin. I leaned my head against his shoulder, a gesture of trust that felt both terrifying and completely natural. He was so solid, so warm. For the first time in a very, very long time, I didn't feel alone. I fell asleep like that, lulled by the rhythm of his breathing and the impossible, miraculous feeling of his arm around me. I woke to the jarring screech of metal on metal. The train was moving. Sunlight, harsh and unforgiving, streamed through the dirty windows. The storm had passed. The world was back online. My head was still on Julian's shoulder. His arm was still around me. For a blissful, groggy second, everything was perfect. Then reality came crashing in. The magic of the night, the bubble of intimacy we had created, had been pierced by the morning light. We were on a commuter train. In public. I sat up abruptly, pulling away from him. The loss of his warmth was immediate and sharp. Julian woke up too, blinking in the sudden brightness. He looked disoriented, and then he looked at me. And the warmth, the openness, the vulnerability from the night before was gone. His face was a mask of confusion and something else. Something that looked horribly like regret. The train, he mumbled, sitting up straight, putting a careful, deliberate distance between us. It's moving, I said, my voice sounding hollow in my own ears. The other passengers were stirring, gathering their things. The shared ordeal was over. We were all becoming strangers again. The silence between us was no longer comfortable. It was a raw, gaping wound. My anxiety, which had been soothed to sleep by his presence, came roaring back to life, a monster with sharp teeth and claws. It was a mistake. He regrets it. It was just the cold, the dark, the weirdness of it all. It didn't mean anything. The train pulled into the main station, the familiar announcement of the final stop sounding like a death knell. People began to file out, eager to get back to their lives. Julian stood up, grabbing his worn backpack from the overhead rack. He didn't look at me. He just stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched tight, just like it always was in the mornings. The monolith was back. I have to, he started, his voice rough. I have a job site. I'm late. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the stream of departing commuters. No would-be, no exchange of numbers, no acknowledgement of the kiss that had felt like it had rearranged the stars in my sky. Nothing. He was gone. I sat there, frozen in my seat, until the car was completely empty. The morning sunlight illuminated every piece of trash, every sticky spot on the floor, every imperfection. The train car no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a crime scene, and I felt like the world's biggest fool. The walk home was a blur. My apartment, usually a haven of quiet order, felt like a prison. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was a physical weight pressing down on me, suffocating me. It was a silence filled with the ghost of him. His voice, his touch, the feeling of his heart beating under my hand. I replayed every moment of the night, torturing myself. I dissected every word, every gesture, searching for the exact moment I had misread everything so catastrophically. Was it the pirate comment? Too forward. Was it the kiss? Did I lean in too eagerly? My own mind became a hostile territory, my thoughts turning against me, a chorus of self-recrimination. You're pathetic. You projected all your lonely fantasies onto a stranger, and the moment the lights came on, he saw you for what you are and ran. The next day, I couldn't do it. I couldn't face the 7:42. I took a later train, a crowded, anonymous one, where I didn't have to worry about seeing him. I told myself it was for the best. I would just go back to my old routine. I would rebuild the walls of my fortress stronger this time. I would forget the feel of his lips, the sound of his voice, the impossible comfort of his shoulder. But my old solitude was gone. It had been tainted. The quiet of my apartment was no longer a choice. It was an absence. The books on my shelves seemed to mock me with their silent stories of connection and adventure. My life, which had once felt ordered and safe, now felt empty. A week passed. A week of taking the later train, of walking through my days in a gray fog of heartbreak. A week of feeling that phantom touch on my cheek, of tasting that ghost of a kiss. It was a miserable, hollow existence. And on the 8th day, I woke up and realized I couldn't live like this anymore. He had broken something open in me, and hiding from it wasn't going to put it back together. Running away was not a solution. It was just a slower form of surrender. So I put on my coat, my armor, and I walked to the station to catch the 742. I told myself it wasn't about him. It was about reclaiming my routine, my life. It was about proving that I wasn't so fragile that one night with a stranger could break me. It was a lie, of course. It was all about him. My heart was a frantic, trapped bird again as I stepped onto the platform. I scanned the crowd, a masochistic part of me searching for him, even as another part prayed he wouldn't be there. The train pulled in. I got on, my eyes fixed on the floor, my courage failing me. I found an empty seat and sank into it, pulling out my book, my shield. And then I heard his voice. Now, I looked up. He was standing in the aisle, right beside my seat. He looked terrible, worse than he ever had before. The dark circles under his eyes were deep, bruised-looking hollows. He hadn't shaved in days. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He looked wrecked. Can I? He asked, gesturing to the empty seat beside me. The same question he'd asked in the dark a lifetime ago. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. He sat down, and the familiar, overwhelming energy of his presence filled the space. But this time, it wasn't just strength and exhaustion. It was laced with a desperate, frantic anxiety that mirrored my own. I'm so sorry, he said, the words rushing out of him in a torrent. Leo, I am so sorry. I'm an idiot. A coward. He was looking at me with an intensity that burned. I panicked, he said, his voice raw. The sun came up, and we were back in the real world, and I freaked out. It felt too good, too real. I thought you'd wake up and regret it. I thought I was just some project for you. A weird story you could tell your friends. His vulnerability was a physical blow. He had been just as scared as I was. He had been spinning the same stories of rejection in his head. I don't have any friends to tell, I said, the admission quiet but absolute. He stared at me, his frantic energy softening into something else. I've been riding this train every single morning, he confessed, hoping you'd be here. I was so scared I'd scared you away for good, that I had ruined the one decent thing that's happened to me in, I don't know how long, maybe ever. The frantic bird in my chest stopped beating its wings against my ribs. It just settled. I took a later train, I admitted. I was scared too. Of me? He asked, his voice full of pain. No, I said, looking him straight in the eye. I was scared that it didn't mean anything to you. A long, shuddering breath escaped him. It meant everything, he whispered. The train was pulling into the next station, the first stop on our usual route. Get off with me, he said, the words a sudden, impulsive plea. What? Get off the train with me. Right now. I'll call my guy. Tell him I'll be late. I can't sit here for another 15 minutes making small talk. I need to buy you a coffee. I need to do this right. It was insane. It was a complete disruption of the routine I had just fought so hard to reclaim. It was terrifying. Okay, I said. We stood up and walked to the doors, a silent, mutual agreement. As the doors hissed open, we stepped out onto the crowded platform. The morning rush swirled around us, a chaotic river of people. And in the middle of it all, Julian stopped. He turned to me, and he took my hand. His large, calloused hand wrapped around mine, a solid, grounding presence. It wasn't a fleeting, accidental brush of fingers. It was a deliberate public act. A claim. A promise. He held my gaze, his dark eyes clear and steady for the first time. I'm not letting go this time, he said. And I believed him. The coffee shop was warm and loud, smelling of roasted beans and steamed milk. It was a world away from the cold, silent intimacy of the train car, but the feeling between us was the same. A fragile, powerful connection that had survived the harsh light of day. We found a small table in a corner, and we talked for hours. He told me about his dream of building custom furniture instead of just framing houses. I told him about the 17th century letters I was currently archiving a correspondence between two lovers separated by war. We were building a bridge across the chasm that had once separated us, plank by painstaking plank. And when it was time for me to go to work, he walked me to the library. At the bottom of the grand stone steps, he paused. "So," he said, a nervous energy back in his eyes. "Dinner? Tonight?" "Yes," I said, no hesitation. He smiled, that slow, sunrise smile that made my heart ache in the best possible way. And then he leaned in and kissed me again. It was different from the first time. It was still gentle, but it wasn't hesitant. It was a confirmation, a beginning, and I didn't care who saw. Months have passed since that morning. My apartment is different now. It's still tidy, but it's no longer pristine. There's a pair of Julian's dusty work boots by the door, a permanent fixture. His ridiculously oversized flannel jacket is often draped over the back of my perfectly sensible armchair. There are 2 coffee mugs in the sink in the morning now, not just one. The silence in my home is different, too. It's no longer an absence. It's a comfortable, shared space filled with the quiet rhythm of 2 people coexisting. The sound of him sketching furniture designs at the kitchen table while I read on the sofa has become my favorite music. We still ride the 742 together every morning. We sit side by side, our knees often touching, his hand sometimes finding mine for a quick, reassuring squeeze. Sometimes I catch people looking at us. I see the curiosity, the confusion, occasionally the disapproval in their eyes. And I find that I don't care. Let them stare. Let them wonder how a man like me ended up with a man like him. They don't know the story. They don't know about the blizzard and the cold and the shared cup of tea. They don't know that this man, who looks like he could break the world in half with his bare hands, was afraid of a stalled train. And they don't know that I, the quiet man who hid behind books, was the one who taught him how to breathe again. I spend my days preserving the past, but Julian has taught me how to live in the present. He is the plot twist I never saw coming, the disruption that saved me from a life of quiet desperation. My life used to be a straight, predictable track, each day a carbon copy of the one before. Then a snowstorm came and derailed everything. It was in that wreckage, in that suspended, uncertain moment between one life and the next, that I found him. Or maybe we found each other. He wasn't a stranger on a train. He was my destination.